Alright guys, I've got another quick update for you regarding the Mana Spark build. Now, I've recently hit level 99 and I'm currently pushing towards 100. And at this sort of level, the deaths are quite costly in terms of how much XP you lose. So I really focused on more of a survivability approach to the build. And I just wanted to share a couple of the changes with you today, as well as kind of do like an updated build guide over the whole kind of character again, just so there's been a couple of changes since then. I've also got another Maxroll for you to have a look at. So first thing we'll do is we'll start with the skills. So we have our Spark. Now our Spark here has the acceleration linked with inspiration, control destruction. I'm using Pierce here because I have a lot of damage. You can replace this with Arcane Tempo if you feel like your damage is not strong enough, but I found the Pierce gem slightly better in terms of clear. But if you're struggling on killing mobs, like you're not one-shotting most of the mobs in your maps, you may want to do sort of Arcane Tempo for some more cast speed, just to make it feel a bit smoother. But you can kind of mix and match it and see which one you prefer. I've gone back and forth a few times, and then considered casting. You could also drop the Pierce and put in Lightning Exposure if you feel like you need a little bit more damage. So I would say try all three, see which one you prefer. It's different kind of play style depending on what you kind of like. Then we have our Archmage. Make sure this is level 21, so either a level 20 gem with a Lightning Mastery or a level 21 gem from a Corruption. Then we have Conductivity with Cursed Ground, Heightened Cursed, and Ritualistic Curse. So what this does is when you actually put it down, it'll put the actual curse down on the ground, and as long as the enemy stays on the ground, it will apply to them. So it's just a way to kind of like pre-put this down before bosses and that sort of stuff. With this sort of damage at this point, it's not doesn't really matter too much, but it's something that you can do as well. I do have an Orb of Storm set up here with Font of Mana, Strip Away, and Lightning Exposure. If you're using Lightning Exposure in the main setup, you won't have to worry about the Strip Away, but it's nice to have the font just for some little bit of regen in some circumstances. If you prefer not to run it, that's perfectly fine as well. And then last thing we have Blink. This is on our staff setup. So as we weapon swap, it allows us to blink. It turns off the Archmage and turns on the blink. So as we're running around, we can just swap to it and blink around. Although you may want to just take blink off altogether, because I think one of the #1 ways to die in the higher level maps at a high level is blinking into things that maybe you weren't expecting. So it can be maybe beneficial to turn it off. If I die on this character going from 99 to 100 with a blink, I will be turning it off myself. Alright, the next thing we're going to have a look at is the passive tree. Now, we've gone through a few iterations of this passive tree, and a lot of you probably have seen some of the changes over the last couple of videos, but I'm going to give you another quick overview of it all, and just going to focus on a couple of key points of the passive tree, just so you understand how it kind of functions. But the main thing that we're looking at with our tree is getting as many joules as possible. So this setup that I've got here, with taking this inner line, is giving us about 22 joules around the tree in total. So we're not getting many actual points, we're mainly just going for travel nodes and then getting the joules. And this is mainly because we want to make the most use of the Adorned unique jewel. Now, a lot of people will see the Adorned jewel and go, wow, this is way too expensive. I won't be able to necessarily afford that. You don't have to spend sort of the investment that I have with the Adorned and my jewels to get a similar sort of output. Yes, to min-max it, to get that last 20% of the build, it is nice to have the 100% Adorned. But with the way that Adorned works with the breakpoints, you don't necessarily need to have one that high. So just an example here, I'll just show you a jewel. So this one here is 10 int, 2% movement speed, and 11% projectile damage. With the 100% Adorned, it's doubling all the corrupted magic jewel stats. So in this case, it would be giving 20 int, 4% increased movement speed, and 22% increased projectile damage. And you can see if you just put it to the side here, and that's coming from 100% Adorned, so this over here. Now, if you have a 50% Adorned, it's going to still be a worthwhile investment, because the main stat that we're looking for in this setup is the move speed, because the move speed is really, maybe not underrated, but it's very, very nice when you get to that high sort of level of move speed. With a 50%, that will make a 2% move speed jewel a 3% jewel. And obviously when you're stacking that, 15 to 20 times, you're getting a lot of move speed, a lot of value out of it. You don't necessarily need to have the int implicits on it. If you can get a couple of implicits here and there, maybe a cold res, maybe a fire res here and there, that's fine. But int obviously is a premium and they do cost a lot to make, and I would not necessarily recommend going for it on every single jewel. Maybe it's something you can work towards in terms of the later iterations of it, but the build will still be really strong if you get a lower level Adorned. Maybe you can afford like a 65-70 Adorned, that'll give you a bit more damage, but as long as you have a 50%, you'll make most of the 2% movement speed jewels, they'll go to the 3%. So that is something that I would recommend trying to integrate if you want to do this sort of build with this trait. I do have a couple of other little nice jewels here, like I've got the +3 spark. Again, you don't need a +3 spark, you can just use another jewel with movement speed. I find that the extra damage is nice, but it is at this point for me quite overkill. You do not necessarily have to have these type of jewels to make it function in that way. Controlled Metamorphosis, this is the jewel that allows you to allocate things in the ring. So this is a massive ring. Try get one with low ore res, and you can allocate mainly. The main thing you want to hear to allocate is pure power. You can also maybe grab Eldritch Will and Lightning Quick if you want to forgo a few of the jewels. But mine build at this point is really optimized in getting as many jewels as possible. As I have those int implicits, I've been taking away some of the other stuff on the tree. As we go around here, I've allocated around the side here Kite Runner. Now, when I find some more Proj Speed jewels, I might take this out and go get another jewel at the bottom here. But for now, I'm using Kite Runner as the projectile speed's very nice for the map clear. A lot of you will have to come over here and take Wildstorm instead. In this case, I have a Megalomaniac that has Wildstorm, so I do not need to take it, but that is something that you will have to take if you don't necessarily have the Megalomaniac. You do not need it. It's a nicer kind of feel. It saves you a couple of points, but it's definitely not required for the build. But the main thing is this tree is designed to basically get as many jewel sockets as we possibly can. So that's why it looks like this in this way. The other thing that we've got on the passive tree is we're allocating Glancing Blows, and I will talk a bit about this in the gear section in the next kind of section, but just know that it is something that I'm taking at the moment and messing around with. But this is the passive tree. It is in the Maxroll guide that I'll link in the description if you want to take a closer look. I would suggest you tweak it to your own kind of benefit. You don't necessarily need to follow this exact tree. You might be taking out a couple of jewels over here and getting more of the stuff that you want up here. You might want to grab this in over here. You might want to grab kind of these sort of nodes here or these ones over here. You don't have to go as crazy on the jewels, but this is a good way to allocate as many as possible. All right, guys, the last little section here I'm going to show you is the gear that I've gone with. This gear will also be in the Maxroll if you want to have a closer look, but I'll just briefly go over a few of the pieces. At this point, I have pretty much maxed out a lot of the slots. You don't necessarily need to have this much power in every slot. The build will still function with maybe 80% of the stats on the gear. So when you are looking at the gear, maybe just cut down some of the values, but I'll talk about that as I go through the gear. The first thing here, you want a wand similar to this. It doesn't necessarily have to have the +5 lightning. You can get a couple really nice ones these days that have +4, but some sort of damage stat. If you can get a high lightning or a high spell, you don't necessarily need to need both. Some mana on there as well is nice, +4 lightning. Cast speed, anything above like 22, 23% is kind of a nice thing to aim for. And I've opted for mana regen rate in my setup. You might want to go for intelligence instead, but something like this is what I've been using for now. I don't think it's necessarily worth it to go for a higher kind of mirror level wand at this point, as the damage is quite overkill for mapping, but that is something you could opt to do if you want to max out the kind of the one slot. The next thing here we have is the helmet. You're looking for high energy shield, high mana, and then the suffixes of int, and then 2 resists that you need. Generally, you're going to need the fire and int, as the dream fragments helps with a lot of the cold. The next thing we're going to have a look at is the shield here. So this is the Mahawk's. This one I've gone back to. I was using a focus before. In my case, I like having the higher hit pool for the maps. So I do have the focus here. As you can see, it does make my damage go from 615 to 770, but my energy shield goes from 11,300 to 12,700. So when the mapping's set up, I am using the shield here. So that is something that I've opted to. If you would like to use a focus, you feel like your damage needs a bit more, you can go for that one instead. The amulet is this one here. So I've got a pretty nice one at this point. So I've got the Lightning Rod Anoint with spell damage, energy shield, mana, projectile skills, cast speed, and attributes. Now the energy shield, I just treat that the same as mana because you've got Eldritch Battery on it, adds it to your mana like it would if it was a piece of gear. So that is basically adding those two stats together. We're getting about 282 mana added onto the build. You need the +3. It can either be +3 projectile or +3 spell. Cast speed is kind of optional here. I prefer cast speed, but there's some really nice ones. You can get int instead. That might be another way to go about it. And then the all attributes you do need to run the Moria, so I really recommend having that on the amulet slot. We then have the dream fragments. So this is kind of mandatory at this point in terms of helping you survive the maps, because the frozen can kill you, and also running a lot of maps with chilled ground, you really don't want to be dealing with that. This one here, I would be suggesting you get one with 24% increased max mana. With the quality, it allows it to be boosted from 20 to 24. As for the implicits, if you're still trying to stack that int, the int is a good kind of implicit to have on it. I do find it does more damage than the 28% increased mana and also the increased damage implicit. So this is something that you can go for. The Moria is an attributes and mana 5 socket. This just outscales the high ES chests, especially when you get to a high enough int level. I think around 700 in it starts becoming better. And at this point, if I dropped it for a high ES, I'd probably lose about 1,000 mana. Breach Ring, the main ones you're looking at here is the mana, cast speed, intelligence, and mana regeneration rate. If you can get lightning damage as a prefix, that's fine as well, but you don't need to really stress too much about it. I really do emphasize the mana regeneration rate on this. It is really handy, especially with the Ingenuity, as it does pretty much double the stat. So as you can see, I have 3,058 regen. I take it off, it goes to 1,600, so it's something that I would really recommend for the build. Gloves, similar to the helm, you want to have high ES, mana, int, and then 2 reses that you need. And that's the same with the boots, but you also want to try get 30 plus or 35 movement speed. And then the last thing is the Ingenuity belt. I've just recently picked up a 92%, but anything kind of above kind of 76 or even 70, just start where you can and slowly go up, because it's going to make your rings more powerful. And the last little thing is the mana flask. Use this flask. It's really helpful in maps when you are just taking a lot of damage when you're not expecting it. You can just spam it and it puts it straight, your mana straight to full. And it can survive a lot of situations. So I think after you prioritize the Dream Fragments and the Ingenuity, this flask is just a good backup to have. Alright, the last thing I want to show you guys is the Maxroll. So I've kind of put in what I have currently in the setup. I've got the passive tree in here as well. Most things should be working. There might be a couple of things like the, what is it down here? The Megalomaniac might not be working correctly, as it does not show you that I have Wildstorm allocated on that. But most of it is correct, and the pathing is correct as well. But again, just a reminder, when you actually go to change the tree around, you don't need to necessarily get every jewel socket that I've got. You might want to mix and match things depending if you want to take something somewhere else as well. Note that I do have Glancing Blows on this build. With the shield, it gives you a 25% base block chance to just basically take no damage. But I want the consistency, so I've got the block chances doubled, but you take 50% damage from the hits still, so it just kind of helps the consistency of some of those hits, but you don't necessarily need to use it if you don't want to. We also have the setup of the skills, so I've got kind of the base of all the skills in there. Again, you might want to add something in here and there, but that's kind of the base skills that I use along with the supports for it. I've got the gear sockets in here, everything you need to know about the gear. Again, when looking for gear, these pieces are going to be hard to acquire at this level, but you can just make cuts where you need to. So like instead of looking for a 200 mana on the helmet, maybe look for 150. Instead of looking for 34 ints, maybe look for 20. You're going to have to make adjustments depending on your budget and what you can get for that one. I've also got a quick build rating here. I don't necessarily know how accurate it is, but I feel like the build's pretty easy to put together. Some of the int stuff can get a bit confusing, but it's generally pretty straightforward. So put the complexities at 3. The gearing for my specific version is a 5. It probably should be higher than that, but again, you don't have to put this much gear into it to get a lot of the benefits of it. Next thing I have put 5 as the clear speed. Obviously, there's some builds like the Temporalis blinking across the whole map in 2 seconds. I'm not going to really count that in sort of the clear speed one, but from what I've seen with the really quick move speed, this is really up there with the clear speed. The bossing, I put as a 4. At my sort of damage, we don't really need to run Lightning Conduit, but I am aware that there is builds that have Lightning Conduit in it that can delete bosses a lot quicker than this, but I can still, with this sort of gear level, kill bosses really, really quick. And the defense, I put as a 5, having the really high mana pool at 13,000, as well as the block chance, basically makes you unkillable at those higher kind of maps, especially with the mana on kill, that sort of stuff. You just feel really, really tanky throughout. I also have the Atlas tree in here for you guys if you were just curious to have a look at kind of what I'm running for now. I do change this every now and again, but this is what I've been running with most of the time. But yeah, I hope that gives you a bit of an overview, and if you would like to start trying to implement some of these things, the Maxroll guide will be in the description. I am going to be streaming after this video comes live, so if you do have any questions, feel free to come to the stream and ask away. Thanks for watching, guys.